All right, and welcome to episode number 19 of Uncovering Unexplained Mysteries for 2016. Big episode. We are here with my fine feathered friend, Mike. How's it going, Mike?
Feathered friend? Who the hell do you think I am? Howard the Duck?
I don't know.
Anyway,
whatever.
That was an interesting...
Trying to make us more kid-friendly.
It's a typical Josh Cannon quote right there.
Yep.
And let's bite into this cookie. Anyway, I'm doing okay. I have this math class that's a thorn in my side right now. I've been studying for, and I didn't do too well in the last test, so I'm hoping I do better on this one. And I got to take it tomorrow, and yeah, I'm not looking forward to that. But I will be seeing A Nightmare on Elm Street in 35 millimeter with my aunt on Friday. So there's that. So it's a little cool thing that's going to happen this week.
That is cool.
And I think it's a double feature now, too, with the second film. But I bought the ticket when it was only the first movie. So I'm going to give the theater a call and see, like, would this ticket still work? Can I still see the double feature? Because I bought this before you changed things and made it a double feature. I hope I don't have to buy the same ticket again. I wouldn't think so, though. But,
yeah, I've been super busy. Mainly with my episode of my YouTube channel, the episode on ghost shows. I hope you guys can all go and check that out.
Yeah, please go check that out. You put a lot of hard work into that, and it shows.
I'm not trying to e-beg right now or whatever, but it's youtube.com/dancingwithghosts. It's episode 18. I worked on that thing for so long, and it has like 67 views. It's pathetic. I feel. I like it very much underperformed. So it's just in time for Halloween. It's a great Halloween video. Everybody who's listening to this right now watches ghost shows or has watched a ghost show. Listen to my opinion on them, and it's very entertaining to boot. So there you go. So also, you can like us on our Facebook page is facebook.com/uncovering unsolved mysteries, and you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/uncovering unsolved mysteries. Okay, so a lot of you are probably wondering what's been going on with the Don Devereux situation. Well, I'm sure you've seen from the title already. I gave that man a call yesterday, Tuesday, and, well, for people who aren't Patreons, anyway, Tuesday, I gave him a call, and, yeah, I had a conversation with Mr. Don Devereux, and it was surreal, man. I'm not even joking. It was so surreal. Talking to somebody, for those you don't know real quickly, Don Devereux was a key interview in a bunch of segments on Unsolved Mysteries. A lot of fans like the Danny Casolaro story, Chuck Morgan, Doug Johnston, the guy who was accidentally murdered, and the bullet was meant for Don Devereux. And anyway, he kind of helped with the show, and I learned that from the phone conversation with him. Oftentimes, Don would be in the telecenter while they were taking calls, and Devereux was, he shed light on, kind of the telecenter and how there'd be an FBI agent on hand just in case they got a hot tip. And you guys are not going to want to miss this this interview. I recorded it. It's on here. It's later on. It's the last thing that's going to be going on. Me and Mike wasn't involved because it was just a one-way conversation between me and Don, so you're going to hear that later on. And also, I don't know if anybody of you would be interested in this. I don't even know why I'm mentioning it, but as I was on the phone with Mr. Devereux, he asked me, well, have you talked to John Cosgrove and Terry Moyer yet? And I said, well, no, I would love to, though. And he's like, oh, well, let me give you their phone number. So a dream that I had many weeks or months ago, and I told Mike, my ultimate goal is to have John Cosgrove and Terry Moyer on the show, could bloody well become a possibility in the near future. That's mind-blowing, folks. I never thought that I would get Don Devereux, let alone the executive producers and creators of Unsolved Mysteries, on our freaking podcast. Now, I'm not promising it's going to happen, but there's a good possibility because he sent a copy of my letter to them at their office, so they know who we are. They know about the podcast. And yeah, so we'll see how that goes, and we'll keep you guys in the loop. It's pretty exciting, don't you think, Mike?
Oh, absolutely. I'm kind of at a loss for words, really, because I never really would have thought that when I first came up with this idea, which originally started out as a really shitty like Unraveling Unsolved Mysteries, bad title. I'm really glad I changed that to Uncovering, because Unraveling reminds me too much of a mummy.
Yarn.
And we're not really unwrapping a mummy here, no, are we? But anyway, I would have never thought in a million years that when I started this, when I thought of this concept and brought Josh along, that it would have gotten to this point where I've even said it before in our last podcast. I'm still speechless that we were able to get Don Devereux, and if we get John Cosgrove and Terry Moyer, I mean that's just I don't know what to say. Like I really don't have words. There are no words to describe it, how awesome that is. It's an amazing thing. It's an amazing feeling. It shows me and definitely Josh that what we're doing is. It seems like there might be some fate involved here. It's like maybe that this is something that was supposed to happen. Everything happens for a reason, and the pieces are starting to fall into place that really do make me feel that this is. I don't even call it destiny or density. If you want. But I think there's definitely a reason for this show to exist, for this podcast to exist, and not only just to hopefully entertain you guys and gals who are listening, but to really uncover unsolved mysteries, to do above and beyond what I honestly thought that I was going to do with this podcast. So it's
didn't
amazing.
Anticipate how obsessive compulsive I was going to be with. I dug my teeth into this thing, and I don't know. I guess I have the kind of time to look into these things because I don't have a wife and kids and family. So yeah, I got time to look up people's addresses.
Well, I knew you were very passionate about the show, and so am I. So I just thought it was worth a shot. And it just came to me when I asked him to join me. And I was actually kind of surprised he actually agreed to it, because it's the first time I ever did any sort of collaboration with anyone other than my best friend. And, I've done multiple collaborations with him and some of my other friends on YouTube, but not someone that I didn't really know him at all.
No,
really,
not at all.
At this point. So I was just like, fellow Unsolved Mysteries fan. I really liked the video he did. And so the rest is history. And now we could actually be talking to the people who are involved for, producing the show. And maybe we can get some more awareness about this show, more than there already is. Maybe get the attention of some people to maybe contact John and Terry, and maybe get a deal sprung to, get the show streaming or something. I mean, even if it's just streaming on YouTube or something, I mean, that would be, I think people would definitely be all for that. Just to be able to watch the segments, that would be huge for the fan base.
After talking to Don, my suspicion is, and this is what I already kind of knew, it's not as though John and Terry do. Which, by the way, Terry Moyer is a female. I did not know that. I thought Terry, for some reason, I thought it was two guys, but no, Terry Moyer is a lovely female.
I knew she was always a female, but
But it's not like they don't want the show on some kind of device or service. They do. Don was telling me that on our conversation. It's just a bunch of mumbo jumbo that you have to jump through as far as I did
legal.
I did a video on my YouTube channel explaining why because I put up in Unsolved Mysteries my top 10 favorite segments and it got taken down. There are guilds that have to be paid. The people who take part in the reenactments, they have to get paid. There's union fees involved for all this stuff. There's a high cost of if Unsolved Mysteries is going to be on Netflix or Hulu or something like that, they're going to need a sizable amount of money. And what my thoughts are is that these streaming companies are like, Unsolved Mysteries, what, that show from the 90s? No one, no thanks, we'll pass. Time and time again, the fan base gets underestimated, and I don't understand that.
Yeah. Maybe John and Terry should consider doing a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo campaign. Maybe get the fans themselves involved in bringing the show back in some capacity.
To any of our listeners, this is what your homework assignment is. On our Facebook page, I was going to make this a Patreon thing, but screw it. This is too big for to just, relegate to, Patreon, because I want everyone to participate in what I'm about to ask. Just post any questions that you might want me to ask these guys, or this guy and this girl. Anything that you ever want to know about the show, any Robert Stack anecdotes, because, I have a few of my own that I'd like to ask. But yeah, just post any questions you have for these people, because there's a good possibility I'll be talking to them soon. I kind of wish I had posed the same question about Don Devereux, but I feel like you'll be pretty satisfied with that interview I had with him. I asked some pretty good questions. And I think that, Indiegogo, Kickstarter, something like that would be appropriate in this situation. But honestly, these people are all getting up there in years. And, Don was telling me from the phone interview that he doesn't even have a computer or a cell phone. He says he's a very old school journalist. He still uses a typewriter, So, I mean, that I'm sure, John and Terry being executive producers, I'm sure they're more plugged in than that. But still, they may not know of these resources. So
it's the whole paying the certain the streaming it. I can see why that's a problem, but people doing reviews of it, I don't think that should be a problem, because that's covered under fair use. The DMCA laws actually cover what you did because it's transformative in nature, and you're doing a review of some sorts. So I don't necessarily feel that they're necessarily. They may feel they're in the right, and in some ways they probably are, but at the same time, legally, you should be able to criticize the show or do videos about the show and have clips, but just in a transformative nature, not showing the entire episodes in their entirety or the entire segments without, narration of your own or different, edits and so on.
Well, I'm definitely not going to be arguing that with them when I talk.
Oh, absolutely not. I know. I'm just saying, they're probably in the right. And they have their own reasons for it.
I think that people these days, and this is an issue I ran into with my Ghost episode that I just released. These companies these days are so trigger happy with those DMCA's and those video takedowns, especially Unsolved Mysteries. They're very nervous that people are out there trying to freeboot their content, trying to make ad revenue off of somebody else's work, and so they just, I think, as an automatic thing now, which is wrong, but as an automatic thing, they just assume every video that uses any kind of footage of theirs is violating some kind of copyright. And a lot of times people just don't feel like fighting it. I didn't feel like fighting it, so I mean, hell, I even got a copyright strike against my channel, and the video got taken down against my will. Because sometimes
the kind of thing that I would like more of these content owners to do is just send these content creators messages and just say, hey, we really, if it, we don't really like this content up on YouTube for free, if you would mind removing it, And I remember having a composer a long time ago when I was posting music still on one of my YouTube channels, a different channel that no longer exists because they got shut down by copyright. So I was posting soundtracks and things like that. And I remember posting the score for Shocker, Wes Craven's Shocker. And the actual composer, he sent me a message and says, I don't really like, this stuff. Could you remove, these tracks and so on? Otherwise, I might have to send you, copyright strikes and whatever. And I sent him back a message, said, no, sure, like, there's no harm here. I wasn't trying to make any money. At this point, I wasn't making any money off that channel. So I was just doing it for fun, trying to share the music. And the guy was actually really nice about it. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing I honestly would like to see more from these content owners. Just ask the person kindly to remove the content instead of sending them a copyright strike.
Bringing the damn gavel down on their channel and just like screwing over some small time nobody like myself.
Yeah. But that's also YouTube's fault, because YouTube has that structure set up, and it's a necessary evil in a lot of ways, though, because YouTube probably wouldn't exist if it wasn't for these policies that they have in place. But I think they honestly could do a much better job reviewing these copyright claims. I've had claims, but what I've dealt with getting strikes for videos that don't have any copyrighted material in them whatsoever. And I've managed to get the strikes off by contacting the people who sent me the strikes and whatever. But it's still an example of how messed up YouTube's copyright system is.
Yeah, it is ridiculous. All right, let's get to the meat and potatoes of this episode here. We're starting off with a segment we wanted to cover last week, but we just didn't have the time to squeeze it in. This is the DeCloud cult. I love cults. They're so fascinating to me. Mike picked this one, but I totally, I would have picked it eventually too. I just forgot about it, but this is a great one.
This is from season 5, and when I first saw this, I was just totally taken aback by what I saw. Religious cults in themselves are always like some bizarre thing that always it attracts my interest. And this particular segment, this particular story is no exception. It begins shortly before midnight on September 17th, 1992, where a young woman named Julie Cooper made a desperate call for help to Tim Santee, a satellite repairman that she barely knew. Santee and Julie set a time, which is around 1:15 in the morning. And just as they had planned, Julie was waiting at 1:15 a.m. with a trash bag full of belongings. She quickly got into the car and began to frantically tell Tim her story. Julie told Tim that for 16 years, she had been trapped in a religious cult called the DeCloud family. The family, nearly 30 men, women, and children, lived together in a commune far removed from the outside world. The DeCloud cult was reminiscent of the religious cult led by David Koresh. And this is a cult that apparently earlier, before 1992, around the same time, it was like this. It was like a compound that was like it was crazy. Like they actually had
the Branch Davidian sect, right?
Yeah, the Branch Davidian sect. Did you have extra info that you wrote down about that?
They were the ones. I believe the Branch Davidians. They were the ones who bunkered themselves up inside that cottage out in Waco, Texas, and they pretty much militarized themselves. They were like this guerrilla kind of militia almost, and they had a shootout with the cops. Like the National Guard had to come in.
It's like a tank.
Yeah,
they brought a tank in there.
Finally, they had to bring in a damn tank, and the tank. Yeah. Now, there's a lot of speculation over this because eventually the house burned to the ground with everybody in it. I think some children escaped, and some women and children escaped, but a lot of the Branch Davidians ended up dying inside this fire. Now, the government's position on it was the fire was set inside, but like by themselves, like they did it. But then a lot of people said, no, the U.S. government did it, to these people. And there was some weird kind of thing in the 90s where there was a lot of people who were on the side of the Branch Davidians. I'm sure it's more the kind of the right-wingy kind of like gun rights people. Like, these people weren't doing anything. They weren't violating any laws. Why is the government going in there and messing with them and all that? And it's like, well, it's a cult, and there was a lot of laws being broken as far as like human, like not human trafficking, but like human imprisonment, I guess, against their will. And I'm sure there was rape going on and non-consensual sex and stuff like that. But yeah, this DeCloud thing was pretty reminiscent of that. There was a lot of these kind of little smallish cults going around in the 90s that were of this ilk.
There was the David's cult, the Branch Davidians, was one of 2,000 cults of the same vein that had sprung up in the United States around the time that this segment was, when it first aired.
Yeah, many of these cults are ruled by self-proclaimed messiahs. And the leader of this cult was named Nelson DeCloud. He was an ex-police officer.
Yeah.
Which...
And DeCloud was literally of the clouds.
Yeah, well, like, oh, what an original name, DeCloud. It's like, anyone who took 1 year of high school Spanish would know that, like, wow, that's really original last name there, buddy. But, ex-police officer, man, it's like, God, these people, aren't they supposed to be held up to a higher standard? I mean, I'm not saying they're supposed to be perfect and beyond scrutiny, but good Lord, man, like, this guy pulling people over for traffic tickets and stuff, in the back of his head, he's thinking, man, if only I could start a cult and make everyone change their last name to DeCloud and just, like, have sex with as many women as possible, that would be awesome. Oh, yeah, you're going to need to sign this ticket here. Okay, have a good day. It's just so crazy to think in my mind that, like, that's what was going on.
Yeah,
his quote-unquote
exactly.
His quote-unquote family was founded by Forrest DeCloud, who was Nelson's father. Now, this probably had a lot to do with why this guy ended up taking on the family tradition here. But when his father Forrest died, Nelson ascended to the ranks of leader. Nearly all the family members were encouraged to change their last names to DeCloud, and according to Julie, Nelson thought he was God's son and that he could do no wrong. I mean, we're noticing a lot of tropes here of typical cult
Exactly.
activity.
I mean, like most cult leaders, he had a commanding presence about him that included piercing white-blue eyes that could strike fear in anyone who gazed into them. Julie moved to the commune in the mid-'70s with her parents when she was just 6 years old. One of the many disturbing memories Julie has of her time with the DeCloud cult was the perverse forms of devotion that Nelson asked for his followers. When she was 10, DeCloud forced her to watch him have sex with a female member of the family.
Quote unquote.
I mean, just think about this. I mean, it's just messed up.
It's sexual deviancy
Sick.
At its finest. Like, here's a guy, much like most of these cults that want to live out their perverse fantasies in the name of religion, in the name of God, whatever God means to them. And they're, I'm sorry, I got no sympathy for these leaders of these cults. I got no understanding for them. To me, they're just sex perverts, they're sex deviants, they're narcissists, they're megalomaniacs, and they have such a commanding personality that they can just get weaker-minded people to, because everybody has that feeling that they don't belong at some point in their life. Everybody has that feeling of they're just floating around aimlessly in life with no purpose or direction. And
so here comes this commanding, powerful guy who seems to give them a lot of compassion and gives them a place to live
and a purpose, because
only.
Julie's parents joined this cult willingly. I mean, they must have sought this guy out or something, or they at least knew of him, and that's one thing the show just kind of brushes over. But it's like her parents joined this cult, so
you'd be surprised how often it happens. How often these people willingly go in and move into these communes with these cult leaders. These people are susceptible, and then they come in contact with someone who's able to manipulate them.
To me, it goes beyond religion. It might start out religious based, but to me, these are people who just they know that emptiness that we all know, every now and then, and they lack fulfillment. Life, when you just go into your 9 to 5 and you don't really feel like you have a purpose, that can get really lonely and alienating and isolating. And when you have this charismatic figure who seems like he has all the answers, at that point it almost doesn't matter if the person seems like they know what they're talking about or not. You're willing to jump on board anyway. And that's how this seemed to have formed, just like any other cults. I mean, look at one flub I made with Don Devereux when I was on the phone with him. He said Georgetown, referring to Washington, but he said Georgetown. I go, oh, like with the Jim Jones thing, and then he's like, no, like Washington D.C. And I was
that's Jonestown.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, oh, I am an amateur. You can tell now. I felt like such an idiot, but no, with Jones.
Yeah, like Jim Jones. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, same deal. Jim Jones was a very magnanimous, not dictator, but he. And I guess the reason why it was less messed up with Jim Jones was because, he was allowing all races, all people. At first it seemed like a very good thing, and it probably was. But see, Jim Jones, like all these other people, had that thirst for power.
Yeah, it becomes a power trip.
Like Adolf Hitler or anybody else, throughout society, and some certain figure who is in politics right now. I'm not going to get into that. Anyway,
I mean, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And when you have that much power over a numerous amount of people, it ends up corrupting you. And Nelson DeCloud is just one example of many. This twisted behavior, though, all this type of stuff where he has forces young girls to watch him have sex, it did not stop there. Nelson would then ask Julie to have sex with him and even say despicable lines like, "What I want you to do is what God wants you to do." And that stood out to me because I'm just like, that's the typical type of dialogue that this type of person would say.
Right.
It's manipulative. They're trying to make someone feel guilty. They're trying to manipulate them into believing that this is God's will. And it's far from it. And Nelson's acts were more like the acts of a demon or the devil than that of a saint. Julie refused his advances, but Nelson was so caught up in his messiah complex that he still thought he could do no wrong and continued to make sexual advances towards Julie all the way into adulthood. Nelson would punish young Julie as well for refusing his advances in various horrible ways, like standing her alone in the woods with no food, no water, or anything to keep her warm. Keep in mind, this scumbag did this to her when she was 10 years old. And he would even have the audacity to say things like, "I don't know when I will come back. God will tell me when to come back." And Julie stood there, shivering in the woods alone, for 8 hours until DeCloud heard the call from his deluded mind and picked her up. This guy just makes my blood boil just thinking about him and his actions.
My first thing is, why in the hell do you want to have sex with a 10-year-old girl? If you're... I mean, I don't know. I just can't,
There is a kind of, with religion, I'm not saying this is the cause of this and the cause of why he wants to sexually molest this 10-year-old girl. But there are repeated cases of pedophilia in the church, specifically the Catholic Church. I don't know if he's Catholic. I don't know what it is. I don't know if that might have been how he was raised. I think some of the thing with some of these Catholic priests is they're forced to become celibate. And that creates some really, really messed up, crazy psychological problems. And one of them is sexual deviancy. And that's a proven thing. That's an actual there's a psychiatrist and psychologist who have actually done studies on this. There's a great film called Spotlight, which was based on the true story of these reporters who revealed all of the pedophilia that was going on in the Boston church.
Oh, wow.
And you even have Batman himself, Michael Keaton, in a supporting role as well. It's a great film. I highly recommend it. And yeah, some of these people, I'm with you. I don't know why the hell they do this. I don't know why they want to have sex with these 10-year-old girls. But I'm just thinking it must be some sort of psychological thing. That's my best.
But what's
guess.
Weird about it is, like, in this segment, he's banging all these chicks in the quote-unquote family who are all, of age and older, and like he pretty much just wants a sexual buffet, and he wants complete control, and it's just how people don't see through that. I mean, it's mind control, it's Stockholm syndrome, it's all the.
Absolute Stockholm syndrome.
It's a soup du jour of mental illness and mental effects that are being used in these kind of situations,
and abuse. I mean, and these usually are people too that don't have anywhere else to go, so he lords that over them. I give you a home, I feed you, I clothe you. you wouldn't be where you are right now if I didn't come in and save you, that kind of thing. It's similar sort of thing that goes on in any sort of abusive relationship. Even with people who are married, and have kids, there's the same sort of thing. I mean, the husband could just continually abuse the wife, and in order to to keep the family together, she's willing to put up with all of this, and she doesn't want to leave him. I mean, people are like, well, why don't you leave him? And it's not as simple as that. I mean, a lot of people in the media just make it out as, oh, the woman should just leave, and it's never as simple as that. There's a lot of different factors that go on, and it's not as easy as you think. And it's easy for you to look at it from an outside perspective and be like, oh, I wouldn't put up with that. I wouldn't deal with any of that. I would leave first time it happened, and that would be it. But you never know until you're actually in that situation.
I think for some people, the crushing loneliness and loss of what do I do now? I think that takes into effect too. Financially
too. I mean, what these people, if they were financially well off, they probably would not have moved in with this cult leader.
Yeah, you never know, though, sometimes, though, because these cults a lot of times can be financed or bankrolled by wealthier members of the family.
I mean, there's that, too. So, I mean, there's not really a concrete answer for why these cult leaders do what they do or why people decide to follow them. And it is baffling to me because Nelson would continue to do horrible acts. I mean, his humiliation tactics and twisted terror, they were not only associated with Julie. His reign of terror spread to everyone in the commune. One member had her hair cut off and publicly humiliated in front of the entire commune just for speaking up about Nelson's cruelty. After this unnecessary and cruel display, Julie agreed to go with Nelson to a small house on the property because she was guilt-tripped into believing that the humiliation was all her fault. And she was young and impressionable at this time as well. And what happened next was shocking. Nelson took Julie prisoner in the compound and forced her to become one of his many unwilling sexual partners. When she was 15, Julie made her first attempt to escape, which was sadly unsuccessful. That moment is like the one where you're just like, oh, wow. That is, I mean, all this other stuff was messed up as well. He's lording his power over these people, and now it's turned to rape. This is going way too far.
When she ran away, they picked her back up, and according to Julie, she was ordered to disrobe in front of everybody, and in the segment he's like, offer your shoes, and there was like some burning barrel, and they throw
it was a burning barrel,
offer your shirt and all this other stuff, and then she was beaten, severely beaten publicly.
I mean, exactly. I mean, I think he got a thrill out of publicly
I'm sure
humiliating these people in his commune. I really do feel that he got his rocks off with that, as well as his rocks off while raping people, which is just messed up. I mean, I want to say a certain word, but I'm trying to clean up my act, so I'm not going to say it.
Yeah, but, you people have finally gotten to us. Okay, we're trying to make this more kid friendly with our content. Does that make you happy? No, I'm just joking. So after that situation happened, she had to always be with them. She was always by his side. She had to sleep with them. I mean, both, I'm sure, literally and figuratively. But she had to sleep with him in the same bed. He would not let her out of his sight.
She stayed with him against her will in his bus.
What a winner in his awesome bus. 7 years passed, and then in 1992, the opportunity arose again for Julie to escape. At Nelson's request, Julie contacted a satellite repairman named Tim Santini. Eventually, he made his appearance at the commune, and when he got there, he was saying, it seemed like, okay, like, I don't really get what this is. Maybe it's like a party going on or something like that. I saw all these buses. And he said, when I got into the office, I more or less recognized Julie after building a rapport with her over the phone. Julie was very meek, and she seemed stifled or held back because of some reason that wasn't obvious.
Yeah, they started beginning a flirtatious relationship with one another that started out as a series of friendly phone calls, and then over time developed into something more. And over the next couple of weeks afterward, Tim started to actually fall a little bit for Julie, and he even asked her for a date. But Julie kept putting things off, saying that she wouldn't be ready for a year, to test Tim to see how far he would be willing to go to start a relationship with her or to help her. And this led to the events on the night of September 17th, 1992, when Julie finally managed to escape from the clutches of the cult and out of the personal hell that she was stuck in.
One thing that appealed to Julie about Tim was he had no respect for Nelson. When he came in to fix their cable, in the segment, they have one of the guys leading Nelson, and they're like, this is our brother in Christ, Nelson. And Tim's just kind of like, oh, hey, what's up? And he didn't pay him any respect or treat him like he was anything, and that made her feel good. That made her feel like this was some guy she could really trust.
Well, Nelson didn't really seem to respect Tim either.
Well, Nelson didn't respect anybody.
He probably didn't respect anybody other than himself, or maybe he didn't even respect himself either. Some people, you'd be surprised, they act all commanding and they have this powerful presence, but in a lot of ways they have very low self-esteem. So the next day, Julie told her, at dawn the same night, when Julie escaped with Tim, Nelson went looking for her. And he and a friend were dressed as police officers and then went to Tim's house to find Julie and to take her back to the commune. Fortunately for Julie and Tim, they entered Tim's brother's house instead. And Tim lived only a few yards away in the house next door, and he and Julie were sound asleep. This is a moment that was like, he's not as smart as he thinks he is. He's God's son, or like God's dumbass. Really going around to the house next door. I mean, not even checking the right address or anything. It's just.
I thought this scene was pretty badass because they're in there and they're like, "Hey, we're the police. Where's Julie?" He's like, "Huh? What?" And he's like, "Where's Julie at?" And the guy goes, "What? You guys are police? Where's your warrant?" And he's just kind of waking up and he's foggy, and they're like, "Tell us where Julie is." He's like, "Hey pal, where's your warrant?" And then as he wakes up, he knows what's going on. He's like, "Hey buddy, get out of here, and he like grabs his bat, and and then all of a sudden Nelson and his buddy ain't so bad anymore, and they start kind of cowering away. I thought how they did that scene was really good. It kind of gave me that hell yeah man, stick it to that guy,
Yeah, it was a crowd pleasing moment, that's for sure.
Yeah.
The next day, Julie told her terrifying tale to Tim and his brother. They both decided that she should get a restraining order against anyone that she felt might harm her or abduct her again. And Detective Dane Larisma, or I don't know how to say his last name, it was a weird last name.
It was a weird last name.
Of the Clay County Sheriff's Department, brought Julie in for questioning. He had long been suspicious of the actions of the cult, and with Julie's long, detailed, disturbing discussion of her life and of abuse inside the commune, his suspicions were confirmed. According to Dane, he and his fellow officers had a hard time just charging Nelson with rape because there were so many other crimes he could be charged with as well. So that's a real eye-opener.
Yeah,
that shows you how bad and how horrible and how twisted and how awful this man is. Or was. So after hearing news of the potential warrant out for his arrest, Nelson DeCloud rounded up all of his followers into buses and moved them away from the commune and into a different location. And as of that moment, they had not been seen for weeks afterwards. And I wanted to include this quote from Julie. She was talking about how she really feels that more people, he should be caught and tried. And this is why she felt that he should be caught and tried. My mom and dad need to know that he isn't the Messiah. He's a criminal. What he was doing is wrong. And this actually does have a good ending for once. This isn't one of those unsolved mysteries that remains unsolved, thankfully.
Right.
This scumbag He did not avoid the law, and he did not stay on the run for very long. Nelson DeCloud was captured soon after the segment broadcasted on television. The cult settled in a farmhouse somewhere in San Angelo, Texas. Once state and local agents converged on the scene, DeCloud kicked out the screen on an upstairs window in an attempt to escape. And I like this moment because I could just imagine this scene in my head, and it's kind of like something you see out of the Keystone Cops, and it just shows you, or an episode of Cops, it just shows you like how out of his league this guy really was. The deputies approached DeCloud, and he apparently tried to wrestle with a few of them briefly, but there were so many law enforcement officers that didn't last very long. They put the handcuffs on him and escorted the scumbag out of the building. He was booked at the local county jail and then extradited to Liberty, Missouri to stand trial on 4 criminal accounts, including forcible rape and sodomy. Since his arrest, other members of the commune came forward to testify about things they witnessed in the group. I would have loved to have seen a reenactment of that, like an extra reenactment of the cops catching the guy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, him kicking out the screen door, and I could just imagine him being like, "You ain't gonna get me, I'm son of God."
It's like, yeah, buddy, that's what they all say. You're coming with us. Go all the commish on his ass.
Exactly. In September of 1994, Nelson DeCloud was tried and convicted of the charges against him. Nelson refused to testify in his own behalf. The judge followed the jury's recommendation and sentenced him to 220 years.
Bam!
Missouri State Prison.
Bam! I'm sorry. This has. I know I only do this for skeptics, but I just gotta celebrate. Yay! 224 years. That means he's gonna have to die and resurrect himself quite a few times before he gets out of jail.
He actually passed away. He passed away, and April 4th, 2014, he died of natural causes in his prison cell.
Good. And that is one guy, if heaven does exist, that is one guy that is not going there.
Absolutely not. Part of me, if God has a sense of humor, he let him up there. No, hey, welcome, my son, to hell.
Yeah, that was a really interesting segment. Cults are like really fascinating to me, just because these people, it's like, where do they get the nerve to do this? And yeah, the sad thing that they don't really touch upon is that, I mean, typically cults disband when the leader is taken out, but sometimes they don't. Usually with these cults, there's a second and third in command, and this guy probably had.
He obviously had a lot of power in that community.
Yeah,
because I think he had a lot of friends, and when Julie first escaped, he put together some kind of search party to go look for her. So he obviously there's probably another DeCloud. It's just not the same cult leader, and that's what's so sad about that. But there were a lot of people who did come forward, so hopefully there probably are a few that probably remained in the cult, but there's a lot of others who are probably like, no, I've been waiting for this opportunity to escape and to get out of this situation, and now I can, and I'm going to take that. It's so infuriating to see someone who masquerades as a man of God and has a family that he deludes and controls and inflicts sexual and physical harm upon them, as well as emotional and psychological abuse. The reenactments were really well done too in this segment. The guy that they casted to play DeCloud, I think, was a great casting choice. This is a guy who, he did have a presence about him, and a good old boy kind of thing, but it was just definitely, he was a very risible guy, and you definitely hated the guy, that's for sure, especially when he's saying lines like, well, it's only, when Mary had Jesus, she was only 14 years old, that kind of thing. Since they do that, they twist things. They twist the words of God. They twist That's
they,
why
they do exactly what pedophiles do. Pedophiles do that same stuff. You know, they
they
try.
make excuses for it.
Yeah.
They try to justify their sexual deviancy, their behavior, and there's no justification for it.
So yeah, that was the DeCloud case. Compelling case, fascinating, but messed up nonetheless. So this is something that we do a lot of times on the show here and there, where we kind of profile some of the fans who listen to the show, just, you know, so it's more of a community feel and you can kind of get to know some of your fellow listeners. This time I'd like to tell you guys a little story about someone named Heather Ramsey. Now, when she told me this, I could not believe it. It was crazy, but she swears it's 100% true. So, when she was a little girl, her family, she had a large family, they wanted to take a vacation to Miami, okay? Now, she lived in Chicago, I believe, or something like that, somewhere up north, for me anyway. And because they had such a big family, they were in such a rush to get to Miami at this time that she actually got left behind. They left her behind at her house. And, you know, this was the 90s, so there was no cell phones, there was none of that. So there was no way that they could really get in touch with her. So basically, you know, she's scared. She doesn't know what's going on. And to add to all of that, two burglars who have been known to stalk this particular neighborhood, they start kind of prowling around her house because they think, okay, the family's not home or whatever, but they didn't know that she was home. And they start like messing around and stuff like that, and start to try to like break in, and then they get spooked when a neighbor, you know, comes and sees them and scared them away. Well, I don't know what happened with this girl, especially being so young, but she summoned some kind of inner strength and kind of almost enticed these burglars to like come into her house, where she had all these elaborate traps set up for them to come in contact with. I mean, it was all kinds of stuff. Like, one of the guys fell through the floor, and another guy was electrocuted, and she had these paint cans that were on, like, these ropes, and when they went up the stairs, she threw them down the stairs, and they kind of swung and would knock them out, and eventually, through a series of these traps, they ended up getting the attention of the police, and they were caught. I mean, that is a crazy story. I can't believe that happened to one of our listeners. Heather, I'm glad you're okay and hope you've recovered from that event. And, you know, I mean, it's completely true and completely original. So yeah, I mean, we're happy that you survived, Heather. Good luck, you know, I mean, good on you for the ingenuity. So moving on to our next topic, we had the suggestion from one of our Patreons. They wanted some more kind of crypto-zoological stuff, and I said, you got it. So this was something I'd been wanting to talk about anyway, so it kind of fit in perfectly. And of course, that would be La Chupacabras. Actually, now that I think about it, this might be one of the last kind of crypto-zoological things that Unsolved Mysteries has to offer that we haven't covered yet, because we've covered Mothman, Bigfoot.
Well, we didn't cover the Loch Ness Monster or anything like that.
You know, I almost don't want to do the Loch Ness Monster because it's talk about like a played out.
Well, also the infamous picture is fake, so
yeah,
that's another thing.
True. I mean, I get that Bigfoot's also played out, but we're not covering this from the side. I
mean, we could talk about it and then also briefly mention Champ and other other lake monsters. Champ was a good one, but then the segment that I was able to get didn't work, so that sucked. So.
Well, I mean, I'm not coming at these from like just the public's perspective of Bigfoot. I'm coming at this from the actual Unsolved Mysteries segment about Bigfoot. That's what I'm talking about. I don't, you know, I'm not so much interested in having a discussion on whether I think Bigfoot's real or not. I am more interested in having a discussion on Unsolved Mysteries episode.
Or talking about all those new video footage or those new pictures of Bigfoot that show up on the internet lately. that are just so blurry that you can't see anything.
As far as I'm concerned, the days of video and photo evidence are just gone. Unfortunately, it's a sad day, but I think with Photoshop and all the video editing that's out there that is available to the common people now, I just literally think everything is just it can be faked so easy. It can look so good now. Things that you couldn't necessarily do in the 90s, things that your everyday person would not have access to.
Yeah, speaking of a chupacabra, like that's sort of a recent thing. Like some people were spreading this picture. I remember they were sharing this a couple years ago on Facebook and places of this, what they thought was a chupacabra. And being a huge movie fan, I was like, no, that's Extro. That's the alien from Extro. I know what that is. That's not a chupacabra. They screenshotted the alien from Extro and found a way to superimpose it in some black and white photo, what looked like someplace in the middle of the woods, and they, made it black and white and touched up some things. And I have to admit, if you didn't know of that movie, and it would look pretty realistic. It would look pretty real, pretty authentic. But no, it's fake.
What is Extra?
It's a really trippy, weird, messed up movie from the 80s. I think it was 82 or 81 or 83. I think it's 82. And there's this alien that abducts this kid's dad, and then the dad comes back later, and he gives this kid a hickey, which gives this kid powers. So he's able to bring things to life out of his imagination, and things go crazy. So he has a Black Panther shows up and kills somebody. This little guy dressed as a jester, like a little person, shows up and kills somebody with a hammer. It's almost like an acid trip. And you're watching it and you're just like, what the heck? What the hell am I watching? And then there's a really crazy scene before because the alien shows up, and then the dad gets birthed out of somebody. Yeah, fully grown out of this woman. It was a pretty effective special effect. And then there's all this crazy stuff too, this alien turns the dad alien turns this babysitter into an egg laying machine.
Oh my God, Mike. I'm gonna need you to stop watching this kind of stuff, okay? I'm just telling you right now. I'm just gonna need you to. You don't need that in your head, all right?
I'm not really the biggest fan of Extro, but it's got some decent visual, some nice makeup effects, and it's slimy and it's sleazy. It doesn't make much sense. The ending has the alien takes the kid with him to onto the spaceship, and they fly away or whatever. And then it has two different endings. One that neither of them make any sense, and there's two sequels for some reason. Yeah, I always remember the trailer though, because the trailer was funny. Because the narrator, it sounded like he didn't have enough time. He was on a limited time limit. So when he was doing the narration for the trailer, he had only a certain amount of time. So I always remember this trailer because he goes in and says, not all aliens are friendly. Extro. Rated R. And then I always thought that was funny because he just.
It's like the studio was like, okay, we're paying for 5 seconds of studio time here, dude. You're taking a little too long there. You need to get that rating in really quick. That's whenever I do my student loan, I know we're getting off topic. Screw you people. We're gonna get to it eventually. We will. Whenever I do my student loan repayment, it's an automated voice, command thing that I got to go through on my phone. And so they have pre-recorded sayings of this guy saying these numbers, so whatever your number is. And he's like, your remaining balance is 1, 4, 8, 7, 9, 4, 6. He says 9 really angry. Every time he's like, 8, 2, 9, 4, 2. It's almost like the angry drunken stepdad did the voiceover for just the 9 one. Like, 9! Now clean your room and do your homework! You little crap, you're not mine anyway! Like, maybe that's a stretch for an example, but I don't know. I just always thought it was funny. Like, he just gets peeved with 9. He's like, 8, 7, 9, 4. Yeah, anyway. So, Puerto Rican rainforest, heaven on earth. Right? You would think so. I mean, it's down there in the, tropics. But a mysterious beast is lurking in the forest that is turning heaven into hell. Now, that's some good writing right there.
Yeah.
3 fingers on each hand, and on each finger, very long claws. La Chupacabra plays on livestock and pets. Composite drawings based on dozens of eyewitnesses kind of show what this thing looks like. And I mean, you can look it up if you want to see. It's like a combination between a wolf and a lizard, or like dragon, like snapdragon.
Like an alien.
Alien. It's the weirdest freaking thing that you've ever seen, really. And even people in the show admit, like, this thing is. It doesn't seem like it should be real, but it is. It's very weird.
It looks like I'm looking at one of the pictures right now. It looks like a gray in terms of its head.
Right.
But it has like red eyes, and then there's like all these spines and stuff on its head and on its back, and it's got these long fingers with long claws attached to them, and it's got this kind of stocky body. It is a very weird, creepy-looking thing.
So, David Negron was the first one to... that was a bad Spanish R roll. Let me try again. David Negron, whatever, was the first one to encounter the beast. Before dawn of September 9th, 1995, Dave went out to check on the family goat. Dave was startled to find his goat had been killed. Quote, "After I found the goat, I was standing there looking around, and that's when I saw the creature. It was black and hairy, large red eyes, and a crest about its head. When I saw it, I was scared and began to run. I've never seen anything like that, and I've never been that scared before." Later that day, investigators from the Civil Defense came, I guess that's a Puerto Rican thing, they came to investigate. When they examined the goat, they only found 2 puncture marks on the back of the goat's head, yet all the blood had been drained from its body. The next day,
like a vampire.
Yeah, the next day, the media dubbed the animal Chupacabras, or goat sucker. Over the next 3 months, dozens of attacks were reported. Strangely, their carcasses were largely intact. Jorge Martin, or George, however you want to say the George in Spanish.
It's Jorge, I think.
That's what I thought. He kept up with the story. Quote, "The puncture wounds go into the animal, right into the animal, into the brain, like it's like it's looking for certain organs. Sometimes it'll go for the liver, sometimes the reproductive organs."
Can you imagine if that was you? Imagine if you were in place of the goat. I mean, that's just a very horrifying thing to think about.
Yeah, I mean, it's not outside the realm of possibility to think about, though, that an animal out there would have evolved over the years the ability to hunt in such a way, you know.
Maybe it's not an animal, though. Maybe it's some kind of mutant creature. Experiments gone wrong, kind of maybe what the Mothman was, or maybe it could be alien. I mean, in origin. I mean, to be honest, I mean, a lot of the characteristics that they're talking about in terms of the goats and there isn't a lot of blood. There's no blood in the body. There's none of that. It's very similar to cattle mutilations. So. And those have had UFO sightings tied into them, so it's not that much of a stretch that it could be alien of alien origin.
My thought was that it, because if you're to believe all the things that we've talked about previously about these UFO sightings and stuff, I mean, it's pretty much common knowledge at this point that aliens are doing research on people, but who's to say they're not doing research on animals as well? Usually when a human is abducted, sperm and ova samples are collected. So to me, it's not outside the realm of possibility that possibly Chupacabras would be mutate or a combination of maybe alien semen or whatever was put into an animal, maybe a wolf or something like that, and they wanted to see, you know, and test what, you know, and maybe the chupacabra,
they got loose.
Or maybe they planted it or something, you know. Maybe a chupacabra is a kind of a hybrid of a alien or like a gray and some kind of a wolf, or maybe it could be some kind of yet unidentified species. You know, it's still definitely in the realm of possibility that we have not identified every single animal species, but in the manner that this thing is killing and how it kind of acts, it does seem to have more of an intelligence to it than just your average, you know, dumb animal.
And there's different descriptions of what this creature looks like. I mean, so some people say it's described as a kangaroo-like monster with reptilian features and scales, and then other times it's described as dog-like. So there might be some, because later on some of these, you know, the skeptics, they go in and say, you know, oh, it's just mass hysteria.
Yeah, you know, it's funny that you say dog-like, because whenever you Google Chupacabra, the two images that you get are the lizard creature that we're talking about and dogs. But these are like psychotic-looking dogs. These are not... These look like dogs that have been, like, not fed for 2 months, and for some reason...
They're more wolf-like.
They look like Doc Brown from Back to the Future combined with a dog combined with a skeleton. It's
Doc Brown.
Yeah, it looks crazy. This thing looks ugly as hell. But this is the more dog-like one that you see. So there's kind of two conflicting images as to what is the definitive Chupacabra.
Einstein, Killer Einstein. So if Doc experimented on Einstein, and then things went horribly awry, that's what the result would be.
I would say take 20% Doc Brown, 70% crazy dog, and 10% skeleton.
It's just such a hilarious analogy, really.
Hey, Mike, just go with it, okay? Just
I'm trying to.
Just roll with me here on this one, okay? I need I need you now. I need your support now more than ever for this crazy
Great
comparison.
Scott!
Great Scott!
God!
So, the attacks had been reported all over Puerto Rico, with the greatest concentration being in, Canovanas. By then, even the mayor, Jose Soto, began to take an interest in the investigation. Now, they actually got this guy on the show, which I thought was pretty cool. Like, the mayor of this town in Puerto Rico was willing to come on Unsolved Mysteries. Pretty neat. Quote, I began to take an interest in this matter when I visited a farm where 5 sheep were killed. I saw 2 wounds in the neck. It attacks all animals, but mostly sheep and rabbits because they can't defend themselves easily. There have been more than 100 animals killed. At the moment, we have some hysteria, some real problems, and some fear, are in fear, and I'm determined to resolve this matter, end quote.
Yeah. I can see why some people... I think there was a little bit of mass hysteria. There were some things in this small town. I mean, this would be absolutely terrifying. This is not something... It'd be scary anyway if it happened to some, locally around, my way or your way. But the socially, things are different over there. So, that would be really, really something that's probably a small town. Just the word spreads really fast, and
they probably thought it was El Diablo.
I think for some people, though, I think some of the sightings might have been exaggerated a bit, because some people might I saw it. I saw the Chupacabra as well, because they want to be a part of the phenomenon. So that's the kind of thing that's kind of hard sometimes with these type of events, because sometimes it might have just been one thing that happened, like one sighting, which is more likely, maybe 1 or 2 or maybe 3 sightings, and then it balloons into more than one.
Well, see, unlike UFO hysteria, there's actually a physical carcass that's left behind with telltale signs. So if you want to be a part of this club, you kind of have to have an animal on your property that has the telltale circular...
And I think the people who talk about the telltale signs, their animals are... But I think there was also probably other people who would chime in and say, well, I saw it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just natural. I
Speaking of
mean,
skeptics, there was one guy in this segment that you think that they're starting out by going, okay, so now they're showing a skeptic, but then it switches. He goes, I didn't believe in this Chupacabra the people were speculating on. Personally, I was just never convinced of these stories. I just never believed them. And that changed one night as the guy's last name is Rivera. Rivera and some of his friends were driving home from church, and then it quotes him again. I saw something strange on the side of the road. At first I thought it was a puppet, but then it began to move. It had,
no, just the thought of a moving puppet is
yeah,
creepy
dude,
enough.
seeing a puppet on the side of the road at night, I don't want to see that. Fucking Saw going on here. Would you like to play a game? It had large eyes that illuminated. It had hair and had claws. When I opened the car door, the animal stuck out a long spike from its mouth.
Whoa.
Yeah. I interpreted this spike as a defensive matter, so I sat back in the car and kept watching. Now I know. He exists. He is not any known animal. I tell you sincerely, what I saw was not of this world. So that guy was pretty. That was a good interview to have on the show because it was like, even though he was speaking Spanish, so they had to sub it in English, but it was still, he seemed very.
That would be a bone chilling night.
Yeah, for real.
Unforgettable. I mean, I'd probably, I watch horror films and stuff, but I mean, it's different when it happens in real life.
Well, that's
like when it happens in real life, you can't disassociate that. You can't be like, oh, it's just a movie. Yeah, no, it's something you saw, and with your own two eyes and experienced, and something was like right in front of you. I mean, just the glowing red eyes. It looked like a moving puppet. The spike coming out of the mouth. I mean, that's even more unsettling to me than any of these ghost stories.
Well, that was what was so crazy about the Don Devereux interview, because it's like literally I'm watching all this unfold on TV, and then here I am talking to Don Devereux, and he's talking about all these people, like, he's saying like, oh yeah, the guy who was shot and killed like next door or across the street from me, blah, blah, and he's saying it to me, Josh Cannon,
yeah.
He's saying this to me, and he's talking about all these things that have went down, and I'm like, this is not a TV show right now. This is a phone call I'm having with a person who was on a TV show who is recollecting real events. Now I am talking to him. This stuff happened to this guy. Like, it was so surreal, and I imagine it would be kind of the same thing to see something like this. It's like, what the hell? Because, you see movies, but that's on the screen, but to see it in real life is just, it's mind-blowing. Most witnesses described the creature very similarly, same details. The head was more humanoid-looking, flat nose, small slit-like mouth, much like a gray, with fangs protruding out, almost no ears whatsoever. In late November, Jorge Martin and a TV news crew asked a veterinarian to examine the animals supposedly killed by Chupacabras. The vet made some surprising discoveries. Precise circular wounds were on the back of the necks of the rabbits, and the removal of certain organs was also present in these rabbits, and the lack of rigor mortis was also present in all these rabbits, which is something that happens to every living thing. When it dies, it gets rigor mortis. I used to know what it was. I think it's some kind of it's a stiffening of your body. I know that much, but I forget what actually causes rigor mortis to take place. But that was not present in these rabbits. A month later, Dr. Soto examined 20 dead birds. Each one died from a circular hole in the back of the head. So it has a modus operandi here, this Chupacabra thing. So, like I was saying earlier, if you wanted to be a part of this club, which I don't know why anyone would, the carcass in question would have to kind of have these telltale things, and to corroborate that this was what everyone was saying it was, the guy Rivera's story about how he saw it on the side of the road and it had a long spike that came from its mouth, that kind of gives you the, all you need to know there, that like, well, that's its method of killing. It's some kind of a straw-like sharp object, almost like if you have a piercing, if you've ever gotten a piercing in your face or in your ears or whatever, if you look at the needle that the piercer uses, it's hollow. And it's very sharp because it actually takes out a piece of your flesh, a small piece, so depending on how big a gauge you get, it takes out a piece of your flesh so they can put in the jewelry. Well, I can imagine this spike thing that comes out of this thing's mouth is very similar to that. It's very, very sharp. When I have several piercings, a lip ring, an eyebrow ring, ear ring. The piercing's usually not even that painful because the needle is so much sharper than a normal needle. It just goes right through your skin, and it's hollow in the middle. So I would imagine it's something like that. I mean, to be honest with you, I think there are worse deaths in the wild to be had than if this thing got a hold of you. It actually sounds like a fairly... I mean, especially if it sticks it into your brain. I mean, dude, you're pretty much
well,
dead
exactly.
right
I'm
there.
talking about when it's trying to search for other organs and it doesn't.
Yeah, and you're not dead yet. Yeah, that would be unpleasant. But I would rather that happen than, say, a bear or shark attack. Although with
a shark attack would probably be pretty quick.
Yeah,
unless it depends on what type of shark. If it's a great white. Maybe it might just eat you whole or nibble on you. Most of the time when sharks attack, they think you're a seal or something, or you're in the wrong area at the wrong time, or you provoke them. Shark attacks usually aren't that common.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I still think it would be slightly more unpleasant than this method of dying. Until recently, every reported attack of the Chupacabra was in Puerto Rico, but last month, back in the 90s, in Miami, 2 goats and 26 chickens perished in a manner that was almost identical to the killings in Canovanas. Maybe it was dogs or some kind of cruel prank, or perhaps, just perhaps, the Chupacabra does walk among us. And you can imagine Robert Stack delivering that line much more eloquently than I just then, but yeah, that is freaky. It was a great segment. It was a little on the short side, but I mean, what more can you really say?
They could have easily put that on the box set.
I know.
Because it's short.
I don't know why they wouldn't have put that on there.
There's a bonus disc on the bonus disc at least.
Yeah, because I mean, it fits perfectly in there with Strange Legends. Although I will say, Mothman 1,000% more interesting, 1,000% better segment.
Yeah.
Mothman actually, funny though that I think of Mothman because there was a lot of animals found in the Point Pleasant, West Virginia area that was killed actually in a similar manner. The blood would be drained, organs would be removed. But, we've already decided that this is a mutant X-Men kind of moth, so this is a different genre. You know, it'd be awesome if they made some kind of, movie or video game, like Chupacabra versus Mothman, or Mothman versus, a large gray or something like that. That'd be pretty sweet.
Well, there's some really awful Chupacabra movies out there, like Chupacabra Terror, like this Chupacabra thing or something. It attacks these people on a cruise ship. It's just pretty awful.
Oh, that sounds awful. Oh my god.
So there's some awful Chupacabra movies out there. There's a found footage one too, I think.
Yeah, so that's pretty much all I have to say about Chupacabra. For you guys who haven't skipped to the Don Devereux interview. We didn't want to take up too much of your time. We didn't want this podcast to be 5 hours long.
Yeah.
So
no.
That concludes the official Mike and Josh segment of this podcast. We don't want to keep you waiting much longer. So up next, we have got the Don Devereux interview. I went and edited it and tried to spoof it up the best I could. I recorded it directly through a app on my phone. I didn't want to try with the speakerphone method and recording it through speakerphone. I figured that'd be inconsistent quality. I wanted to get a direct recording of Don, so I downloaded some app that taped the call, and he was aware that it was being taped and all that. And so, for now, we are going to leave you with the Don Devereux phone interview done by yours truly, but I guess we'll do our official goodbyes right now. Have a good rest of your night, and Mike...
Have a nice night, and thanks for listening.
All right, the Don Devereux interview. All right, so before this starts, when the recording cuts in, I basically was talking to Don about the Mistaken Hit segment that he was featured in, where Doug Johnston was killed instead of Don. And I basically asked him, so the segment ends with Robert Stack saying Don Devereux has recorded sources from a number of credible people that say he's next. How has your life been since that segment? And we kind of go from there. So have fun.
Well, I had some sense at the time we did that quick segment on Unsolved Mysteries that I was under surveillance. I mean, it was quite obvious that there was somebody sort of stalking me, and so I had to take the warnings pretty seriously. I had been called by the bureau chief for the San Francisco Chronicle in Washington, who had a CIA source who had warned him to warn me, and I had been contacted also by Israeli military intelligence, by a colonel in the Amman who was a source of mine who had CIA connections, to warn me I had a problem. So I took it seriously, and I could physically tell that there were people cruising my my driveway. I was being sort of watched. And right after we got that little blurb on that first blurb on the air, when Stack went on, before we did the broadcast on Doug Johnston, we did a little warning. Unsolved Mysteries was very quick to note that I might have a problem and that they would obviously be very upset if something happened to me, and kind of a warning that, not a good idea to do anything. And
right.
Very quickly, the surveillance and all that kind of stuff seemed to go away. And basically, if there was anything coming in my direction, it seems to have been brought to a halt by the scrutiny that Unsolved Mysteries happily was providing to the situation at that time. So nothing happened. I mean, the problem sort of disappeared. The homicide became an open case. I don't think the Phoenix Police Department was ever comfortable with the notion that it might have been an agency-related shooting. I think they found that very difficult to get their head around. And I can't be absolutely certain what happened. I just know that the guy got shot. It had all the earmarks of an agency hit. It was a .25 caliber, back of the left ear, single shot, classic agency kill. It shuts down the autonomic nervous system immediately. I saw photographs of the guy that was killed, and I cut myself worse shaving than he bled from that one. Yeah. He just died quickly. It had all the earmarks of an agency hit. Probably if it was an agency hit, it was a rogue agency hit. I don't think it was planned by the Director of Central Intelligence. I think it was conducted, if it was that at all, by some guys locally here who were involved in the guns and drugs business that was happening out of a place called Firebird Lake, a little airstrip south of Phoenix. And I've been poking around down there, and I think I basically angered some folks, and somebody got concerned enough to pay me a visit.
Wow.
And I think I was just lucky, just lucky. The guy that was shot was at an address right across the street from mine. My street number ended in 3. His number ended in 8. And if you can easily write a 3 and an 8 that look very much alike.
Right.
And I used to get mail from his side of the street, and I'm sure he got occasional mail from my side of the street. And I think what happened is the shooter simply was in the wrong place. And this guy drove a car that looked just like mine, had facial hair like I did, and I think he was just very unlucky.
Gosh, that sucks. That sucks for that guy.
Yeah, I think it had nothing to do with anything. And, all these years later, there's been no more to tell about it. I was warned afterwards by somebody in Israeli intelligence in Mossad, who had a base here in Phoenix, to quit doing that particular investigation. And I took the warning seriously. And I basically backed off what I had been doing at the time. The Mossad guy told me that whatever I was looking at was way above my pay grade, that there was nothing I could do to impact whatever was going on in terms of illegal activity at that airstrip, and that all I could do was get myself hurt.
Wow.
And I couldn't change anything. He asked me rather pointedly if I had a wife and kids, and he told me to get my priorities straight and not to be a kamikaze pilot down there being reckless. And I didn't take it as a warning. I took it as a warning, not a threat. I didn't think he was anything other than just being friendly. But I had to concur with him from what I was looking at, that that was not the smartest place for me to be poking around. I'd been run out of that airstrip twice, once by a truck, once by a helicopter when I was poking around down there, and they obviously had my plates and they knew where I lived, and And I was up against something that was a lot more formidable than I could really do anything about.
So did as far as the investigations that you and you mentioned on the segment, Dan Casolaro, who's another guy that we've done our podcast segment on, did y'all's research into, for instance, he was researching what he called the octopus, and I know he was requesting information from you at one point. Did any of that research into like the CIA and the Department of Justice corruption and all that with the gold bullion and all, did any of that ever come to fruition? Were there ever any arrests or indictments made as a result of that research?
No, the gold stuff that I was looking at pretty much happened in Arizona between the years 1972 to roughly 1985, 73 to 85, maybe about a 12-year period. By the time I found out it was happening, it was over. So it had been pretty much culminated by the time I even became aware that it had been going on. The gold moving out of Southeast Asia pretty much had completed moving by 85. Okay. And it probably pretty much had been dissipated in the bullion black market long before I even became aware that it had been going on as a reality here at all. So no, nothing ever happened. It was a situation involving high-level U.S. government involvement. And the agency was basically acquiring a source of funding they didn't have to go to Congress for. There was around $200 billion in play, in bullion coming out of both Vietnam and later the Philippines, that had been stashed by the Japanese at the end of the Second World War.
Oh wow!
And this is all the gold booty that the Japanese had looted all over Southeast Asia, from temples and all kinds of stuff. And toward the end of the Second World War, the Japanese buried it. They buried some of it in Vietnam around Cam Ranh Bay. They buried lots of it in a number of locations in the Philippine Islands. General Yamashita was the Japanese general in the Philippines. And so they stashed away what was, back in those days, a couple $100 billion in bullion. And the OSS, the precursor of the CIA, got the Japanese burial maps at the end of the Second World War. So the intelligence community had some idea where this stuff was and roughly probably how much there was. And toward the end of the Vietnam War, they began moving it out of Cam Ranh Bay, and they began moving it out of the Philippines over a longer period than that. The stuff coming out of Vietnam largely went through the Philippines as well, and eventually it all came back to the States, where it was processed and converted into commercial gold ingots and sold on the international black market. Much of it ending up in Switzerland, in Kloten, which is an airport near Zurich. There's a large gold depository like a Fort Knox under that airport that's used internationally by all kinds of people to store vast amounts of bullion. And once the gold gets there, it pretty much stays there. The paper may change in terms of who owns it, but the gold pretty much sits there at Kloten. And I was able to trace from the stuff I was looking at that that's where a lot of the gold was going. But no, nothing ever happened. The records that I ended up with some of Morgan's records, which the government didn't know. I may not know until you broadcast it that I actually have them. I have some records that the government didn't confiscate when they confiscated Morgan's office records after he was killed. He had stashed a small amount of records, kind of a cross section at another location, and I have that collection of stuff. And the gold was being sold in the black market, either to law firms or banks. Both of whom have client privilege in terms of divulging who they were buying the stuff for. And so I have no idea who the clients were. I suspect they're multinational rich people, a consortium of the world's upper 1% were investing in bullion and doing it in the black market. The stuff was being sold at X number of points below New York or London closing because it was black market stuff. So it was cheaper to buy the black market bullion than it was to buy legal. Just enough of an incentive that they probably had no trouble selling it. and it's done. By the time, and it was sold in huge amounts. The biggest single shipment that I saw was 5,000 metric tons in one deal.
Oh my gosh!
I saw some 1 metric ton deals and lots of 1 million ounce deals. They were wheeling and dealing in volumes that you just almost can't imagine as this stuff was being moved ultimately from Asia through the United States, basically to Europe.
What strikes me about all this information is that these are things that the average everyday person assumes is happening, but we have no proof. We have no solid evidence of it. We just have kind of these notions that this kind of clandestine stuff is going on, and obviously, if any kind of government level officials were involved in this, then from what you were saying in the segment, that it was not under an official capacity. It was all a clandestine operation. So that's
well,
just...
there was a faction within the national security establishment that was very hawkish, and back in the 80s there were as many as like 7 little wars going on in Angola and all over the place, where the U.S. government was backing folks that were fighting insurgencies or governments they didn't like. And the agency appreciated having an opportunity to have a bank account, if you will, that they didn't have to go to Congress to explain. So the notion of having a black bag fund, a slush fund of that magnitude to conduct military adventurism in various places without congressional oversight was a very attractive idea, and it certainly lasted for a while. It was quite a bit of money. But yeah, they were doing it, but it was not. It was not official policy. You simply had segments in the national security establishment, in defense and in the CIA and other places that supported this kind of thing. I don't know how much. Some people in the National Security Council certainly knew. I would have to imagine in the 80s that Ronald Reagan didn't have a clue. A lot of this stuff was going on probably right around him and under him without his knowledge. But it was a lot of money, hell of a lot of money. And people got killed sticking their noses in it, and I can understand that. When you're talking about $200 billion, that's a lot of loot.
Right.
So there was jeopardy attached if anybody was stupid enough to mess with it. Had I messed with it while it was actually going on, I might not have survived. Would be my best guess. But by the time I was looking at it, it was done. There's a limited amount of damage I could do.
Right.
And I don't think I'm almost surprised that anybody even bothered to mess with me at all. I think it was an overreaction on the part of somebody's part.
But as far as Danny Casolaro goes, he was kind of getting into it.
Danny was in a very dangerous spot, and Danny was very reckless. Danny was the kind of guy who didn't tell people what he was doing, didn't tell people where he was going. Traveled with his files, didn't want to leave them at home where somebody could steal them. Well, he didn't realize how easy it was to steal them when he had them with him.
Right.
When he was killed in Martinsburg, West Virginia, all of his files disappeared. He had a briefcase and an accordion file full of stuff with him there, and it's all gone. Whatever Danny was doing disappeared, with his death. Danny was so anxious to be kind of a lone wolf star, to make it big, to do something splashy, that he wouldn't have to share with anybody else, that he kept everything very much close to the vest. And that's a very dangerous way to play when you're messing around with the kind of things that he was looking into. He was very careless at that level. I didn't know him very well. We had one, lengthy phone conversation. That's it. And he wanted me to ship him everything I could be willing to ship him on the gold stuff I was looking at. And I was just about to put it in the mail when I heard on the radio he was dead. So I didn't send it.
What do you suspect? If you have to guess, what do you suspect that he was he just like naming names as far as like the conclusion of his research? Of pointing the finger at certain people who were involved.
Danny had a high level source at an IRS facility in Martinsburg. I don't know who the source was, and I don't know what he was getting from the source, but that's why he was there. And that probably had something to do with why he was killed. I don't know exactly what he was after, but he was working the octopus. He was working it. He saw the gold stuff I was looking at as just one of the tentacles of that octopus, and he was busily working on it. He planned to go out to California, I know, to do some work out there at an Indian reservation where there was some hanky-panky going on. And he had a game plan. He didn't share it all with me. He didn't share it with many people. But he obviously was careless enough that whoever he was going after had a pretty good idea what he was doing, and I think he paid for it. I'm pretty sure he was a homicide victim.
Yeah.
Not much question about that.
It certainly appears that way from all the details that they post on the segment. That was the conclusion that we came to anyway, for sure, given the details of his death and everything. The fact that his files disappeared, the fact that the bathroom was partly tidied up. Somebody did mop up some blood on the floor of the bathroom with a towel. He obviously didn't do that. There were bruises on his head. He had some fingernails torn, like he'd been resisting something. Had there really been a careful scrutiny of that as an autopsy, things might have been learned. But he was cremated pretty quickly, and there was never really a serious autopsy done. He'd been embalmed before his brother could even get into the body to do even whatever autopsy was remotely possible after embalming. So, no, it was obviously a covered up violent death of some sort, and then all of his stuff disappeared. So that tells you something in and of itself. Those files didn't just walk away by themselves. Yeah, and obviously those things are probably long gone by now, I would assume.
Whatever they were. I mean, all we know is very general terms of what Danny was doing, but I don't know the details of what he had. And but he was quite excited when he talked to me. He was certainly not suicidal. He was a guy with a mission. He was on his way to some big story, and quite worked up about it, actually. I would have loved to know what he had, but we'll never know.
So
I don't work that way.
Yeah. So you feel like, as far as all the kind of the threats that were coming against you, you kind of feel like the visibility of Unsolved Mysteries at the time, because at the time Unsolved Mysteries was one of the top-rated shows. It was very visible by a lot of people. You feel like the fact that they kind of covered the case and kind of made you somebody in the public eye that, we can't just stuff this guy out because too many people will know now. You kind of feel like that's what kind of helped you out.
Well, when I was warned by Israeli intelligence that I had a problem, they told me that the next time around it wasn't going to be a shooting. It would be a crime of opportunity, was the way it was phrased. That I'd be the victim of a hit and run or a mugging or something that would make it look like it was just a random event.
Oh, wow.
And but Unsolved Mysteries made it very clear that if that happened, they would not accept that. That whatever happened to me, however it happened, they would look upon it as a deliberate, crime related to the work I've been doing. And I think the putting that out at the time with the audience that they had a lot to do with putting a lid on it. I also think the fact that people like the San Francisco Chronicle and others were aware from their own sources of the problem. It just made it clear that if anybody was going to do anything, that they weren't going to be able to do it as easily as maybe they had thought they could. And I think that took the pressure off. And because it probably was a rogue operation to begin with, there may have been pressures within the agency itself to put a lid on it. But whatever happened, the problem very quickly and very conspicuously went away after the initial warning. Because right after this happened and I got the warnings, I flew out to Burbank, and even before the segment we did on Doug Johnson was aired, they did a couple-minute segment the following Wednesday, just as a warning to whoever was messing with me, just to back the hell off. And I think that worked. I think it was effective.
Oh yeah, I would have liked to have seen those. I haven't. Yeah, I'm sure that was something that they just aired at the time, and that you probably can't find on TV anymore or on the internet or whatever. That would have been a nice little follow-up.
Yeah, I probably even have a VHS copy of that someplace in my office. I have no idea. So long ago I can't remember, but it was just an ad hoc blurb. They flew me out. They put me in a suit, put me on a stool, and interviewed me for a couple of minutes and put it on the air, and Stack and some others said a few things, and that was it. It was all very quick. And I had played the tapes for them that I had taped the contact I had with the Chronicle and with Israeli intelligence, so they had both tapes to listen to, and their tapes are pretty clear that there was a problem, floating around, that I had pissed some people off, and people were concerned about it. So I was surprised.
Well, I was very happy to learn when I searched you on the internet that you are still alive and well, and I'm sure everyone...
I'm doing fine.
Everyone listening is happy to know that as well. So what? I mean, I saw your the letter that got sent to me. It's got all the things that you've done, and you can find this information on your website too. What have you been kind of working on since that time? I mean, I have the letter. I can read it, but
I've worked on a bunch of stuff. I worked on the second and third edition of a book called Mary's Mosaic on the murder of Mary Pinchot Meyer in Georgetown back in 1964. She was John Kennedy's girlfriend, serious girlfriend.
Georgetown, as in Jim Jones's.
Georgetown in the sense of Washington, D.C.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
Suburb of Washington. She was a wealthy lady, and she was Ben Bradley's sister-in-law. And she was, the last 2 or 3 years of John Kennedy's life, she was his serious lady friend. Had he survived the presidency, he and Mary Pinchot probably would have married at some point. She was the ex-wife of Cord Meyer, who was a top-level CIA official. And she knew who Kennedy was angering in what he was doing at the time, and she knew pretty much if he was killed, who did it. And when the Warren Commission report came out, she threatened to go public with what she knew, and she was killed within a week or two in Georgetown and silenced. And obviously the same people were behind it as were behind the Kennedy assassination. And a book by Peter Janney called Mary's Mosaic is out now in third edition. I worked on the second and third at Peter's request with him. Worked on some stuff on Oklahoma City. I've been working on a lot of different things that are, some of them reflected on my website briefly at least. I've continued to work on the Don Bowles homicide, still doing some work on that many, many years later, still discovering some interesting information regarding it. And I'm working on a couple of films. I'm working on a documentary film on the Bowles case and the beginnings of another film on corruption in the Phoenix area generally back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So I'm busy. It's very strange. I'm 82. And I probably have never been busier in my life than I am right now.
It's supposed to work the opposite way, isn't it? You're supposed to be kind of calming down in the later years.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not complaining because I'm not a rocking chair kind of guy, but
right.
I had not anticipated being this busy. In fact, I'm probably a little busier than I would like to be. But at least it's better than not doing anything at all, so I can't complain. I've had a good time, and I'm still pretty active.
So these documentaries that you're working on, is there any kind of plan to release them maybe on Netflix?
The first documentary, which is Untitled, will be probably roughly a 1.5 hour to 2 hour feature documentary. Hopefully it'll be released next year sometime, with a somewhat narrow focus on the Don Bowles car bombing in 1976. And the convoluted miscarriage of justice that followed that. The other film which is a California-based commercial, made for streaming on HBO or some goddamn thing. I don't know where they're going to go with it. Is much more speculative. If they're going to do it, they're going to have to, as investors, raise a lot of money to get it bankrolled. Whether that happens or not, I'm remaining to see. But it'll be interesting to see. But right now, a certain amount of my time has been taken up in film work. Whatever happens with the documentary that's going to be completed this coming year, it'll be available on the web, and it'll, among other things, and all of the outtakes will also be available on my website.
Okay.
And I've done 12 or 15 hours on camera already, just narrative on the Bowles case, and all that stuff will be basically available on my website as research material for anybody that wants to look at it down the pike. And I'm trying as kind of a bucket list to get as much as I can get done on some of these things while I can, and make sure that there is a good record left behind. So it's a busy time.
So just for anybody who's listening to this who may not know what the Bowles case is, according to your letter here, it just says there is the aftermath of a car bomb of a murder of a Phoenix journalist, Don Bowles, Maybe you could just elaborate a little bit on what that case was.
Don was the victim of a car bombing in 1976 that was carried out because of his work looking for an organized crime connection in the greyhound racing industry in Arizona, and I'm certain that there was a connection. And Don had been working for some time trying to establish that. He was getting close. He was on the edge of making some major disclosures in that investigation. He also had a source who was the ex-wife of one of the principals in the dog track business here. And a lot of the motivation to kill Don was personal. It was anger that he was using this guy's ex-wife as an information source. So there was a certain amount of personal aspect to the killing. I mean, somebody put a bomb under Don's crotch and blew him up at high noon in Phoenix. And there was a miscarriage of justice following it. The people that did it were well enough connected that they managed to misdirect the case, and a couple of guys were ultimately prosecuted who had nothing to do with it. One of them ultimately died in prison, convicted of something he didn't do. The other one ultimately did manage to get himself loose. But it was not the finest hour for the criminal justice system in Arizona. It was a reflection of a great deal of corruption in this town at that time. And both in the killing of Don and then the cover-up and the framing of innocent people to make it work. So it was a mess, a really bad situation back in the 70s. So the 60s, 70s, and 80s in this area were an extraordinarily interesting and corrupt and violent time, and fun to work as a journalist, but not necessarily a lovely place to live during that period if you had any integrity. It was a very corrupt situation.
Well, yeah, that's kind of how it came up with the Chuck Morgan case as well. It just kind of seemed like things were being played pretty fast and loose in Arizona as far as the things you could get away with.
Well, Morgan was killed just because they suspected he might not be a stand-up guy if he got in trouble. He was killed because they were afraid if he was ever prosecuted, he would talk too much because he knew too much, and it was kind of a preventive, homicide. He hadn't done anything.
Yeah.
He hadn't squealed. He hadn't done anything at all, but they were just afraid he might, and kind of got alarmed about it and decided to solve the problem. But he was very much involved in a money laundering operation in Tucson for Joe Bonanno and some other organized crime groups that Bonanno had allowed to use that system. And Morgan was in a position where he could have done a great deal of damage had he ever decided to talk to people about it. But he hadn't made any moves like that at the time. But Bonanno was not the kind of guy who took chances, and somebody got alarmed about Morgan, and he was killed. That was in 1977. And because he was also, what had happened is the mob had been using the escrow operation that Morgan ran in Tucson to not only launder money, but to also handle the gold sales for the mob's access to black market gold that they were stealing from Motorola and other places at that time. And when the CIA began moving gold out of Southeast Asia and the Philippines, they took advantage of the organized crime gold refining and illegal sales operation that Bonanno was running out of Tucson. And rather than reinvent the wheel, the CIA simply arranged to piggyback on top of the organized crime black market gold operation. And so Morgan was involved in that as well as what he was doing with the mob. But it was the mob that killed him, not the agency. So all of that stuff was handled through Arizona. That was the reason, because Bonanno already had a well-established machinery for processing and selling illicit gold in large amounts. And the agency just took advantage of that and made him an offer he couldn't refuse. So,
now, there was some detail on the show that I was curious about, and like everybody else was curious about when we talked about it. And there's some detail about Chuck Morgan having some $2 bill that was found in his underwear that had some kind of a map, crude map on the back of the $2 bill.
That's true. He had a money clip in his shorts that had a $2 bill in it, and it had drawings on both sides and a map on one side and a bunch of names on the other, and some numbers. and we've never been able to figure out precisely, what that represented. It was obviously very kind of code for something. He obviously was trying to tell some sort of a story. There may have been a companion piece, a letter that supposedly existed at his house. If so, it disappeared. And no one's ever been able to figure out precisely what that $2 bill represented. But it's very graphic. It includes a map of the Tucson border area with Mexico and a bunch of Hispanic names and a lot of numbers. And I have no idea to this day precisely what he was doing, but he obviously was trying to leave something behind that would be helpful. And I'm damned if I know what to make of it. Nobody could figure it out.
That's so cryptic, You'd think maybe he would leave something more obvious, maybe a letter or something,
Well, he also told his wife that he had left a letter, and my impression is that between the letter and the $2 bill, probably somebody could have, like a book code, they could have figured out what he was doing.
True.
But his house was searched after he was killed by people posing as FBI agents that were not FBI agents. And if there was a letter, I think it got removed. They went through the house with a fine-tooth comb, looking through the pages of all the books on the shelves and everything, obviously looking for a piece of paper. And they may have found it because it never turned up. And that happened within a matter of days after the homicide.
Wow, it's so surreal, like talking to you and actually hearing about these things that actually happened. Because for us and our listeners and all, it's like we love hearing about these kind of things because obviously they're intriguing. For me personally, I find them very intriguing and fascinating. But my life is a million miles away from anything like that. But like you in some parts of your life were kind of in the thicket of these things, and these things actually were happening around you. Like, were you ever like frightened at any point as far as having people like stalking you and hearing about all these cases, these people who you knew or acquainted with, and they were being kind of
other than the fact that somebody may have taken a shot at me, which didn't work out.
Yeah.
I really didn't have any serious problems. I lost a button in a bar fight once where somebody grabbed my shirt and I lost a button. I had a pickup truck try to run me down in an alley one time when I was coming home shopping late at night, and I don't think it intended to hit me. I think it intended to scare me. And over the years, that's about it. I really have not had a whole lot of I've been chased. I've had to haul ass to get out of some places on occasion, but I haven't been hurt, and I haven't been really in any serious kind of confrontations very often with anybody. I never felt most of the time in any kind of jeopardy, and conducted my business like any other journalist. I wasn't afraid to go out in the streets at night and go to bars and do what I had to do. But looking back on it now, I may have been a little naive, and I may have been lucky. But I think, the biggest thing I can say is that I probably, in all candor, never was that big a threat to anybody. I think I was a nuisance. And I'm almost saying that with regret. I don't think, by and large, people saw me as anybody who could really cause them that much grief. I was just a nuisance, and there were lots of safer and easier ways to deal with a nuisance than to kill him. So I think that's probably what kept me from more serious trouble. I'd like to think I could really cause people a lot of grief, but in point of fact, it's often taken me, by the time I've really figured stuff out sometimes, years have gone by, and it's no longer, it's like the goal step. By the time I got on, it was over. I don't think I've been that much of a hassle at this point. I'm sorry to say, and so I've been chronicling a lot of stuff that I really was not able to affect. So in that respect, I've almost been more of an historian than anybody that was changing the course of events, and that probably kept me alive and well.
Right. Well, that's what I was going to say. You're alive to tell the story, and some of these other people unfortunately aren't. So that's definitely a positive thing.
I take it as such. I take it as such. I'm happy to be here. So
I gotta ask, and I know people would be angry at me if I didn't ask. So I'm assuming you actually got to meet Robert Stack and have conversations with them, or anything like that? Do you have any kind of stories about Robert Stack or how he was as a person?
He seemed like a very nice guy. I only had a couple of occasions to spend any time with him. If you recall the show, he used to do some of his narrative walking around with a trench coat,
right,
between a bunch of pillars that looked like they were like he was walking through an area of architecture of some sort. And we used a church site up in Pasadena, California, for a lot of that shooting of him introducing segments that way, walking around seemingly at night in a trench coat, being a little mysterious. And he had a trailer that he obviously hung out in when he was shooting up there. And I've had a couple occasions to sit in his trailer and drink coffee with him. He was considerably elderly. He looked younger in television than he was in fact. He was not a young man anymore.
Right.
But he was much more translucent in skin and aging in person than he looked like when he was on camera. But he was active and bright and enjoyed what he was doing, took great pride in the show, along with his role as that Chicago FBI agent, Elliot Ness.
Yeah,
on television.
Ness, yep.
Those are the great prides of his life were portraying Elliot Ness and doing Unsolved Mysteries. Back in the days when Stack was the sort of talking head for the show, we had about a 25% solve rate on cold cases, which was actually pretty good. We reached upwards of 30 million people at peak. We had a call-in center where you could call in anonymously to a telecenter in Burbank.
Right.
And the first show I did, we got like 1,000 phone calls, which was, for me, that was extraordinary. I mean, I worked in the print media before that, and I might get 2 or 3 angry letters, but I put down 1,000, and we got 1,000 phone calls at the telecenter.
Jeez.
And I later learned that from working that, I did a number of segments with Unsolved Mysteries over about 10 years, and about 3% of the phone calls we got were useful.
Oh my God!
That may not sound like much, but if you get 1,000 phone calls, that means 30 working tips.
True.
The point is, you got to go through everything. But if you have the patience to go through the 1,000 and see what they have to say, and you can screen out the ones that are obviously not going anywhere, you'd end up with some useful information. And so we were able to get useful information enough of the time that, as I say, we were running about a 25% solve rate on cold cases. When we aired the show on Wednesday nights, the FBI normally had a guy at the telecenter in Burbank because we would always do a couple of 1 or 2 items each night about a fugitive who's on the run from something. And they would have a bureau agent on the site in case we got a phone call saying where the guy was, so they could act on it quickly and catch him while he was still in that motel in Kansas City or something. And so the FBI worked with us very closely on fugitive cases, and we were getting a lot done. I was really sorry to see it ultimately go off the air.
Yeah, we are too. Trust me. That's what we're trying. To as this podcast grows, we're really hoping that we can. Because I've already talked to an assistant from the show, and we're hoping that they can strike some deal with some online streaming service to put the show back on, at least on like Netflix or something, because the fan base for Unsolved Mysteries is hugely underestimated by.
The old shows are still on cable somewhere, as I understand it.
Well, they did a revamp with Dennis Farina as the host, and it's just not the same show. None of the fans are enjoy the Dennis Farina Unsolved Mysteries. Everybody wants the.
Well, they're not doing these are all old segments. They're just revolving old stuff over and over again. Yeah, I've seen some of that. I mean, occasionally I know that's out there, but I talked to Terry and John, the people that own Crypto-Zoological Productions, on occasion, and they're very anxious if they could ever do it to get the show really back on the air again with the capacity for new segments. They unfortunately don't seem to have been able to get sponsorship to get that done.
That's what I figured.
But they've talked about it. They'd like to. They have no problems with the idea of reviving the show with essentially the same format. But it was quite effective. We did some really good stuff, and we had a pretty good solve rate, and it was a hell of a lot of fun to do because. For me, coming from the print media, it was like a kid in a candy shop to get that kind of interaction with an audience. where you've got that many people calling in after the show with ideas and information. It was extraordinary.
Right.
It was just a lot of fun to go out. I used to go out on Wednesday nights and be there when I had a segment on, so I could occasionally take a call myself if it was really a productive
cool.
one. And it was a marvelous way to do journalism. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, sounds like it. I mean,
but it changed a lot. What happened in part was that the networks at that time ultimately went from NBC to CBS for a year, I think. And CBS wanted a whole different look. They wanted everything to be young. We had to select young victims, young cops, young journalists. They were aiming for like a 17 to 35 age range or some damn thing. And they wanted everything on the show to be young. And in the process, they screened out an awful lot of stuff that we otherwise could have done, including me ultimately, because I was getting to be way too old to fit in that mold anymore. So I just quit. And then I think it went off the air at the end of that year. But the advertising guys got a hold of it and had a whole different idea who they wanted to target, and completely screwed it up as far as I was concerned.
Yeah, that's kind of how I felt about the Farina revamp too. They're clearly trying to make this Unsolved Mysteries look like the next CSI or Forensic Files, or they're trying to make it all look young and hip with the video effects and the quick cuts and the shortened segments and all that kind of stuff. And we see through it. It's like we don't want that. We want the original stuff, and I will never understand the whole marketing demographic, trying to make it young and all that. It's like the show didn't get successful like that, so why would you? I mean, I don't know. It's like, why would you change it? Why fix what isn't broken?
I couldn't figure it out either. I mean, the show was reaching middle-aged and older people. That's who had most of the discretionary income back in those days. So I don't know why they weren't attractive as a market. But the show was reaching a lot of people and reaching them quite effectively. But somehow people got this notion that everything had to be aimed young, and it changed the demographics of the entire production, and I think it screwed it up. I don't think Terry and John were happy about that. I think they were just doing what the network insisted that they do. I think this didn't come so much from the production company as it did from the network folks. The suits at CBS, I think, were the ones that had this vision that was not, I think, a very good one. I know Terry and John are quite committed to getting it. Have you ever talked to them? They're good people.
I would love to talk to those guys. I haven't dug up their contact info yet. I don't even know if it's available online, but I would love to.
I can give you their phone number if you want it.
That would be fantastic.
The two key people are John Cosgrove and a lady named Terry Muir, and they've been running it for a long, long time. Good folks, both of them. I sent them a copy of the letter you sent me with a note I was going to talk to you. So
cool. Yeah,
they know you're out there. I presume they have no problems with what you're doing. I would assume they would appreciate the support.
Well, I mean, what's happened is in the 90s, when me and everybody, all of our main listeners, when we were kids, our parents and grandparents would play the show. The demographic that you were talking about earlier, they would play the show and we would watch it, and we all had a fondness for it. And it's not just a nostalgia thing, because if it was a nostalgia thing, there's a lot of bad shows that I would be watching now too. But even as a kid, I just knew quality when I saw it. And so all of the kids are grown up now, and we're all in our 20s and 30s, and we want to hear about the show. We want to see the show. And so we found, me and my friend Mike, who do the show, we found that the largest demographic for our show is the 20 to 30 year olds who are now grown up. They love the show. So I'm trying to get it out there and hopefully.
Well, talk to them sometime. See if you can. You're as I recall, you're in Florida. Where are you based?
I'm out of Jacksonville, Florida.
Okay, so you're a long way from California.
Yeah,
unfortunately. But I'm sure you try to get a hold of them at some point if you want to talk to them about something. But I'm not too sure what you can get done. I mean, they would like to get back on the air themselves, so it's not like they don't want to. But it's just finding the sponsorship to do the show the way they want to do it is apparently difficult to do right now. And I don't have much of an understanding of a lot of what's contemporary television. I'm 82, and God knows there's probably 14 generation gaps between me and an awful lot of stuff I'm looking at. So I don't watch television much anymore, and I'm kind of not involved in it particularly. And I don't even own a computer, as a matter of fact. I don't use a cell phone. I use a landline and a typewriter, and I'm a good sort of 19th century journalist at this point.
Hey, nothing wrong with that. All that stuff comes.
But it works for me, and I don't get involved in all of this stuff. But they're good folks in Burbank, and I have very pleasant recollections of the decade or so that we worked closely together during the 90s. And they let me do a lot of interesting stuff. I did a segment on Casolaro and all kinds of stuff with them, and it was a lot of fun.
Well, so cool. Yeah, I'm going to try to reach out to them and give them a call. Even if I could just have them on the show, I feel like that would be huge for our podcast. I mean, having you is huge in and of itself, because we never expected that we would actually get anybody from the show on. We were just talking about the segments and our insights into them, but we never actually thought we'd get people from the show on the podcast. So if we could get, the more people we can get, kind of the more we live up to our podcast name, which is Uncovering Unsolved Mysteries. We're kind of digging in deeper to the segments in the show. So, just having them on the show, I think, would drum up more interest. And I mean, we're just steadily growing more and more every week. So I really appreciate you talking. I don't want to take up any more of your time. You said you don't have a computer. I was going to ask if you had an email address that I could send to the.
No, I mean I have a website. I have a website that you've seen evidently, and I don't even operate my website. I have a guy that does that for me.
Okay.
And I don't even look at my own website. He puts stuff up on occasion that I give him to do. But no, I don't. Among other things, I don't like the email is like doing everything with no control over the information, and I don't mind putting stuff on my website as a finished product. I don't like to put work in progress in any electronic format where anybody can look at it.
That's true.
And it's just so easy when you're working homicide cases and organized crime cases and government corruption cases and all that kind of stuff, which I do. I don't want to be infiltrated, if you will, by people monitoring how much progress I'm making. And anybody who is a reasonably decent hacker could basically get into my system at any time, probably, and do that. So I just decided a long time ago I was not going to be vulnerable to any kind of electronic snooping, and so I just don't. I don't use it.
Probably smart, given the work that you've done and the things that you've experienced.
Well, I also, from a research point of view, it's not important to me. I mean, most of the work I do is old-fashioned journalism. It's knocking on doors and talking to people, and it's primary research. And it doesn't involve having to look to see what somebody has already written about it on the internet. So I'm not doing secondary work. I'm doing primary work, and it doesn't require internet at all. So I'm perfectly happy being a 19th century kind of guy. Anyway, good luck with what you're doing, and if you have any luck with Terry or John, let me know.
Okay.
And feel free to use my name and encourage them to talk to you.
Is there anything that you'd like to plug as far as like a book or anything like that? I remember you were mentioning that book that you would, is there anything you'd like to plug as far as where people could purchase it or anything anything at all like that?
Well, I mean, obviously you can go to Amazon and probably get it. I have no idea. I mean, the book called Mary's Mosaic by Peter Janney.
I'll definitely mention that on there.
And I worked on a book called Oklahoma City by Roger Charles and Andrew Gumbel, just called Oklahoma City. It came out several years back. Worked on that with Roger. So those are both they're both also mentioned on my website at some point. But we just put the third edition of Mary's Mosaic out about a month ago. And it'll be the last edition. The third is the last edition. And it's probably going to end up as a film. It's been optioned now for a Hollywood film. Hopefully that will happen at some point. It's an interesting tale. It's kind of a backstory to the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting.
The same people obviously were involved in the decision to kill her as it killed the president. And that's very, very clear. And we've made some headway in working on that case. So it's all been fun to do. But yeah, this is worth looking at.
All right, cool. Well, that sounds great.
All right. Well, stay in touch. Be good.
Thank you. Thanks again. I just greatly appreciate you.
And unfortunately, I had to cut it off because that's where the old music cued in. But we just basically said goodbye to each other. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. This one was awesome for me. I loved talking to Don.